Hi. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel. I know some of you saw my updated community post a few weeks back that my grandmother passed away. That happened, and then when I say my work that I do to make money blew up. I work with nonprofit events. They had a big event on the 13th of this month. If anybody's done anything big, you know that the last few weeks leading up to an event, things just get crazy. I literally had no time to even sit down and have a meal. I was so insanely busy. So that happened. And if you can't tell, my hair is different. This is not a filter. Loved the blue, but I needed something new. And so I did a change and actually really do like it. I love my hair right now. That has passed. I am back. I am ready. I am recovering. I'm getting better. The mourning process is happening. We're all good. I really wanted to come back here. And firstly, may I say, welcome to anybody new. I am now above 200 subscribers, and that is crazy to me. Welcome, new Herstorians. Welcome back, old Herstorians. Let's get on to today's video, which is a doozy. I'm so happy I did the script before my work life blew up and everything else in my life blew up, because this is a long one. Today, we are discussing a woman that I've had on the back burner because A, she's already very well known, so I wasn't quite sure what I could add, but I need to do some more well-known women to get more on track on this channel. So this video is for the YouTube algorithm. I'm figuring that thing out as fast as I can. It's for the channel. And B, the research time needed for this woman is a lot. So I figured, why not? Today, we go back in time to one of my personal favorite times in American history, the Wild West, to talk about one of the most famous women in Wild West history. She doesn't need any introduction. We're gonna talk about Annie Oakley, yo. Let's get started. One thing I am going to attempt to do is separate fact from fiction. Her life is so crazy that some facts are not real, but because of who she is, wouldn't put it past her if some of these facts are real or are not real. Anybody who knows Annie Oakley knows some stuff can be fake, some stuff can be real, but quite honestly, I don't know which one is which. So buckle in, get some ice cream, and let's get going. Phoebe Ann Moses was born on August 13th, 1860 in a log cabin in present-day Willowden, Drake County, Ohio. Her family called her Annie, and her parents were Jacob and Susan Wise Moses. Annie was the sixth of 9 children, and she was the fifth of 7 who survived into adulthood. Her parents were Quakers of English descent, and Jacob was a veteran from the War of 1812, and by the time Annie was born, he was 61. At the time of her birth, Jacob was suffering from hypothermia in late 1865, and by early 1866, he died from pneumonia at 66. Susan would later marry Daniel Brumbaugh, and they had their own daughter. When Jacob died, Annie was 5, and she had to help provide for the family. Annie was smart from the start. She would help catch game by making traps before she picked up a gun. Annie's family was poor, like poverty, poor. So things are already rough, but luckily life is gracious because when early 1870 rolled around, Annie's stepdad, Daniel, died. Love when God does that to you, huh? Already struggling to make ends meet after Daniel died, Susan couldn't handle it. So she sent Annie along with her siblings to live with neighbors. On March 15th, 1870, Annie was sent to live with the superintendent of the Derrick County Infirmary that housed the orphaned, elderly, and mentally ill, Samuel Crawford Eddington's family, where Annie would be a kind of nanny for his kids. She's 9 at this time, and in exchange for helping with his kids, Samuel said that he would give Annie an education. Great trade-off. She also worked at the infirmary, and Samuel's wife Nancy taught her how to sew and decorate. Now, this is where things get murky. Either by this point, Samuel was breaking his promise to give Annie an education, and she had become an indentured servant. Because of this, Samuel had loaned her to a local farm family to help care for their baby on the false promise that Annie would be paid 50 cents a week, or about $12 today, and there she would get an education. The family wanted someone who could work the farm, pump water, cook, and was bigger. So Annie, being a girl, didn't exactly fit that. But Annie's tough, right? So she spent a good 2 years with this family where she was basically a slave. She endured mental and physical abuse. According to Annie, one time the mom put Annie outside in the freezing cold with no shoes as punishment for falling asleep while sewing. Because that makes sense. She called the people the wolves in her autobiography. She's never used their real names. All of her writings about this family, she just calls them the wolves. In the spring of 1872, Annie was luckily eventually able to escape this family and was able to reunite with her mom. It is thought that the wolves were the Studebaker family, but it also could have been the Abram Booz family. There's that story, or she stayed with the Eddington family till she was 13 or 14. Then she went back to her mom, not being forced to go to that farm at all. You pick which one makes the most sense. Regardless of which story you believe in, when Annie reunited with her family, two things were happening. Her mother had remarried for the third time, and even with this third marriage, the family's financial situation was still bad. Going back to when she was a child, Annie started trapping when she was about 7 and started shooting and hunting at age 8 in order to support the family. She would sell her game like quail and pheasants to Greenville locals, and some would then ship what they bought to hotels in Cincinnati and other cities. She also sold her game to restaurants, grocers, and hotels in northern Ohio, and with her hustle, she earned enough money to pay off the $200 mortgage on her mother's house at age 15. $200, just so that you know, is equivalent to $5,700 today. Oh, how much I wish a mortgage was $200. Clearly, Annie was known in the region as a great markswoman, and this skill would eventually become her career. In either 1875 or 1881, the dates aren't clear, while Annie was in Cincinnati visiting her sister, the Baughman and Butler traveling show was passing through. Part of this traveling troupe was Irish immigrant, former dog trainer, and marksman Frank E. Butler. Now, every town the show went to, part of Frank's act was to challenge local shooters to contests of 25 shots consecutive to prove that he was the best shooter. Cincinnati hotel owner Jack Frost. Sometimes the jokes just write themselves. I'm sorry. Cincinnati hotel owner Jack Frost, who is thought to have known Annie through her selling game to him, invited Annie to participate in a shooting contest with Frank and placed a bet of $100 or $2,856 today. Now, apparently, Frank didn't know who he would be competing against. All he knew was he was challenged to a match. So imagine his surprise when he showed up and learned that his opponent would be a 5'0" 15-year-old girl named Annie. I love that. More than likely thinking that this would be an easy win, he was shook when Annie was neck and neck with him during the match. The match might have been a draw were it not for either Frank's shot of a pigeon fell out of the boundary line, or he missed the shot entirely. That made Annie the winner of the match and of the bet. A 5'0" 15-year-old girl beat you. After this match, Frank was mesmerized with Annie and started, as the articles say, courting her, and the next year they married. Now, when they married is unclear as well. And I'm going to try and tell you both sides of stories as much as I can without going too off the rails, but this one's pretty big. According to the Archives of Ontario in Canada, Just roll with me here. A certificate says that the couple married on June 30th, 1882 in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. However, other sources say that they married on August 23rd, 1876 in Cincinnati. Personally, I believe they married in Cincinnati. It just makes more sense to me. And also, why go to Canada to marry in the 1800s? Just stay in the US, dude. This confusion could be due to Frank's marriage to his first wife. Was it final in 1876? And you can't get married while still being married. Plus, it doesn't help that throughout Annie's career, the public often thought that she was 5 or 6 years younger than she was. I think that's because of how she looks. I mean, she is 5 foot nothing. And she does look very young in the face. And this is before filters. After they married, Annie and Frank began performing together. They first performed together in a show on May 1st, 1882. This was because Frank's normal partner was sick, so Annie stepped in. Her job was to hold things for Frank to shoot at. Annie was able to do some shooting herself, but she mainly just held stuff. It is around this time that Annie adopted the stage name Annie Oakley. She chose this name probably because of the neighborhood where she and Frank lived in Cincinnati, Oakley. Others believe she took this name because Oakley was the name of a dude that paid her train fare when she was a child. You freaking peck. Offstage, though, she was known as Mrs. Frank Butler. Over the next few years, they traveled all over the country with their dog, George, giving shooting expeditions, and George was a big part of their act. Okay, let's talk about Annie's talent. If there's one thing you know about Annie Oakley, it is that she was hella good with a gun. She could shoot a card in half, shoot dimes, glass balls that Frank threw into the air. She would even do this lying on her back, being either too trusting or too stupid. Frank would light a cigar between his lips. You know where this is going. And Annie would shoot at it while it was in his mouth. She could put out a candle, and truly I don't know how this physics works, uncork a bottle with a single shot. If anybody is a physicist out there that understands how this works, please tell me. But she wasn't only a good shot, she was a really good performer. She had a unique stage persona that was the complete opposite of the feminine way that is not associated with the masculine art of shooting. She dressed on stage in Victorian clothes with a Western twist when she added a Stetson hat. I mean, can we just pause here? This is on point. This outfit is on point. She would skip the 30 paces, blowing kisses to the crowd as she went before taking her shot. Most famously, she made a crazy accurate shot using a mirror to aim. This crazy photo? Yep. I don't even know what to think about that. You know, like I can't aim anything on my face when looking into a mirror. And yet she's shooting a gun. Okay. But when she missed a shot, she would dramatically pout. And I say missed because, I mean, you can't make every shot. Everybody would think you're just that good. Duh. She masterfully exploited the newness of a female sharpshooter, turning it into a performance and a massive success. At a performance in March of 1884 in St. Paul, Minnesota, Annie met and befriended the legendary Native American Lakota tribe leader, Sitting Bull, who you might know mainly from the amazing defeat of Lieutenant Colonel George Armstrong Custer and his 7th Cavalry Regiment at the Battle of Little Bighorn in 1876. Sitting Bull was, as with everyone, very impressed with Annie's shooting skills, her modest, badass appearance, and crazy confidence. They ate each other up. Annie gave him a gift of a signed picture of herself. He gave her the moccasins he wore at the Battle of Little Bighorn. Yes, you heard me right. And he honored her with the nickname, forgive me if I say this wrong, Watanya Cecilia, or Little Sure Shot, and she would be called that in many newspapers and advertisements. Later that same year, Annie and Frank met the infamous William Buffalo Bill Cody while the couple was performing with the Sells Brothers Circus in New Orleans as so-called champion rifle shots. Now, I hope to Buddha I don't have to explain who the heck Buffalo frickin' Bill is, but as I've learned in my short life, it amazes me what people know and don't know. Like, wow. Just very briefly, a guy that I went on a date with didn't know what the Titanic was. And we were going to see the movie Titanic. Unless you've just woken up from a coma as far back as 1811, who doesn't know what the Titanic is? Very briefly, William Frederick Cody, mostly known as Buffalo Bill, was one of, if not the most famous people of the American Old West or Wild West. He was an American soldier during the American Civil War with the Union Army, a bison hunter, and received the name Buffalo Bill when after the Civil War he was contracted to supply the Kansas Pacific Railroad workers with buffalo meat. It is thought that he killed in 18 months 4,282 buffalo or American bison, whichever one you want to call it, okay? My grandmother and my mother and I literally had a fight about if buffalo or bison are one or the same thing. Whatever. But luckily, none more were killed after that. I mean, at least not to the point of near extinction. Humans respect nature more than that. Come on. It wasn't until 1869 that Bill met Ned Buntline, who published Bill's insane story into the crazy successful novel Buffalo Bill, King of the Borderman. Then later on, playwright Frederick G. Metter adapted the novel into the hit play Buffalo Bill. When Bill saw the play in New York, that gave him the bright idea that he wanted to play himself on stage, and from that, the world-famous traveling show Buffalo Bill's Wild West was born and traveled all around America, Britain, and Europe. And it's because of this show that whole thing became the first thing that we think about when we hear Wild West. By the time Annie met Bill, he was already a very accomplished sharpshooter, and at first, Bill didn't want to hire Annie or Frank, so they continued with the circus. But in 1885, after a steamboat the company was taking down the Mississippi River took on water and sank, no one was hurt, but Bill's best sharpshooter, world champion Captain Adam Bogardus' health took a permanent turn. His guns were lost, and due to that, he quit, leaving an opening in March of 1885. After a 3-day trial with the show, Annie and Frank earned their spot in the show and would perform with them for the next 17 years. Now, obviously, when Annie joined Buffalo Bill's Wild West, this was a massive turning point in Annie's life. See, until this point, Frank was either sharing the spotlight with Annie or he was the spotlight. However, with Wild West, Annie was the star. I mean, she did this for Pete's sake, so yeah, she was freaking famous. Incredibly, to me at least, Frank wasn't butthurt about a woman being more successful than him, and happily became her manager and assistant, while Annie was put on posters being called a champion marks woman. As we know, Annie blew up in fame. Along with performing with Wild West, she also did many shows on the side for extra money. And the theater business began calling exclusive tickets to shows Annie was in as Annie Oakley's. And you know how tickets used to get a hole punched? Well, this was A, to prevent the reselling of the tickets, and B, the reason for the hole punch was reminiscent to the playing cards Annie would shoot during her acts. The reason why some tickets were hole punched was because Annie made that a thing. You could take that as a souvenir because Annie would shoot playing cards. Isn't that freaking cool? History is awesome. Annie even earned more money than any other performer in the show besides Buffalo Bill himself. When I say this girl was crazy famous, this girl was crazy famous. In June of 1887, Buffalo Bill's Wild West show went to London as part of the American Exhibition. That word is the bane of my existence. This was a World's Fair to show America's greatness. The Wild West show was the main attraction. The fair was at the same time of Queen Victoria's Golden Jubilee or 50th anniversary of her reign, which, quick pause. What this means is that the American Wild West, the cowboy era, was at the same time as the Victorian era. That right there is one of the reasons why I love history so much. Two eras in human history that seems eons apart were happening at the exact same time. And one last thing to blow your mind, and then we'll move on really quickly. Abraham Lincoln was alive and doing his thing at the same time as the samurai era. Just look up those nuances. It's so much fun. Herstory is so much fun. It's excited to be back. While in London in early May, the show performed several times for the royal family. And during a performance on May 6th, Queen freaking Victoria herself stood up and bowed deeply when the American flag came into the arena. That was the first time a British monarch saluted to the American flag. Plus, the British crowd reportedly roared in approval. When she and another performer's acts were finished, the girls, of course, curtsied to the Queen and walked to her, where the Queen reportedly told Annie, quote, "You are a very clever girl." She also made a great impression of Edward, Prince of Wales, and his wife Alexandria, who shook hands with her instead of the proper kiss on the hand. Alexandria reportedly called Annie, quote, "a wonderful little girl," end quote, and Edward said, quote, "what a pity there are not more women in the world like that little one," end quote. Annie honed her skills and show womanship while performing the over 300 shows in London. The newspapers in London pressed her extensively for her shooting skills and greatly embellished her Western background, which just made her fame even bigger. One newspaper even said that her marked womanship was better than Buffalo Bill's. Ooh. The show went back to the States in October of 1887, and Annie brought back with her, after the 4 months in London, a collection of awards, trophies, and shooting medals. When Annie performed in trap shooting clubs, which is basically a place that people can practice shooting at clay targets, and since her field was a very male-dominated field, sometimes she felt isolated and alone because the men didn't take her seriously, and the women didn't accept her, but she couldn't give a crap less. Quote, "Sometimes when I was invited to shoot at trap shooting clubs, the wives and women friends would be invited. They would look me over oft times disdainfully, but I would not mind them at all. If they wished to be friendly, they would. If they did not, I did not care." End quote. After another UK tour around May of 1888, Annie and Frank left the Wild West show for reasons that were too long to tell, but toured and performed with many other shows as well as independently for the rest of that year. Girl, I have some drama to tell you, I found out. One of the reasons Annie might have wanted to leave the show was because of another female sharpshooter, Lillian Smith. Listen. Apparently, there was a rivalry with Lillian for not only their skills, but the fact that Lillian was 11 years younger than Annie. She was 15 when she joined in 1886. This is also thought to be the reason Annie altered her age by 6 years, because Lillian was becoming the big thing in newspapers and might have become jealous of the younger, newer girl. Girl, jealousy is ugly. Luckily, Smith left the show and Annie returned in 1889, just in time for the 1889 Paris Exposition. The Buffalo Bills Wild West 1889 European tour began in May, starting at the Paris Exposition in Paris. After that ended in October 31st, 1889, they went to southern France, Spain, Italy, Austria-Hungary, and Germany before returning to the States in the spring of 1890. While in Europe, Annie performed in front of more crazy, famous, well-known people, including in front of King Umberto I of Italy, the President of France, Marie-Françoise Sadi Carnot, and many others. epically. While in Germany, they performed in front of the newly crowned Kaiser Wilhelm II. Yes, this dude is alive during Annie Oakley. It's freaking insane. He himself requested that Annie shoot the ashes off of his cigarette. I have no idea if that is true or not, but God, I hope it is. Interestingly, Annie was very popular with women, mostly because her acts were neither harmful, too intense, unbecoming, and were very favorable to women and children. Buffalo Bill saw this and made the most of it, increasing her fame even more. The show went back to Europe 2 more times in 1891 and 1892, doing another performance for Queen Victoria in 1892. When in the States and on the off-season, Annie and Frank lived in Nutley, New Jersey from 1892 to 1904. Get this! Buffalo Bill was BFFs with Thomas Edison. He had built an electrical power plant for the Wild West show, which at the time was the largest power plant in the world. With them being friends, on September 24th, 1894, Buffalo Bill and 15 of the show's Indians were filmed by Edison. More specifically, they appeared in 2 kinetoscope films. Kinetoscope was an early type of film camera. That same year, on November 1st, Annie and Frank were filmed by Edison's kinetoscope film called Annie Oakley, also known as Little Sure Shot of the Wild West. The film showed Annie rifle shooting at stationary and moving objects at Edison's Black Maria studio in West Orange, New Jersey. The film was just 21 seconds at 30 frames and was the 11th film made after the first commercial showing began on April 14th, 1894. This is the coolest thing ever. Like, it just brings Annie Oakley to life. It's so cool. People went to see this film and paid a nickel to view it. How I wish movie tickets were a nickel. And this film made Annie the first cowgirl on screen. I am blowing your mind. I am back in full force. Now, what some may not know and why women adored her so much is because unlike all the men in the sharpshooting gun world, Annie showed the whole world that women could handle firearms just as good, if not better, than men. She was a huge voice in advocating and encouraging women to learn how to use pistols because they would be kept in their purses and could be used as self-defense. She was so passionate about teaching women to shoot for protection and sport that she taught over 15,000 women how to shoot for free for years. Quote, I think every woman should learn the use of firearms. I would like to see every woman know how to handle firearms as naturally as they know how to handle babies. End quote. Very unique thought process, and I like it a lot. Leading up to the Spanish-American War, Annie said she would happily raise and train a regiment of 50 women sharpshooters for the war effort. She even wrote a letter to President William McKinley on April 5th, 1898, saying, quote, offering the government the services of a company of 50 lady sharpshooters who would provide their own arms and ammunition should the U.S. go to war with Spain. End quote. Funny enough, literally 2 weeks later, the Spanish-American War began. Unfortunately, her offer wasn't accepted because women weren't allowed to serve in the military at the time. But Theodore Roosevelt did name his volunteer cavalry the Rough Riders after the crazy famous Buffalo Bill's Wild West and Congress of Rough Riders of the World, where Annie was a massive star. Around 3 a.m. on October 29, 1901, near Linwood, North Carolina, the Wild West show was traveling to their final performance for the season in Danville, Virginia. There was a misunderstanding at a switching station. Basically, this is the flight towers of trains. They are responsible for making sure the trains are on the correct track that is going towards their destination. This misunderstanding had the train that Annie and Frank were on have a head-on collision with another train. Annie had severe injuries from this accident, temporarily paralyzing 5 of her spine bones. When she recovered, either because of the accident or was just over the traveling or a mix of both, Annie retired from the Buffalo Bills Wild West show in 1909 after touring continuously for 20 years at the age of 41. I also have to mention that people still thought that Annie was younger than she was. When she retired, her hair was starting to turn gray, so this too could have been a deciding factor. In 1902, she began doing shooting lessons at exclusive clubs, and Frank got a job being a representative at the Union Metallic Cartridge Company in Connecticut, which he promoted Sharpshooters, and this job allowed the couple to continue doing shooting exhibitions. Now, I know you're getting tired, but just stay with me. Her story is long, and this part is crazy. All of this is important because, you know, my stories, I go from birth to death. In 1904, the U.S. saw the prohibition of cocaine. Stay with me. This was, of course, news. I mean, just to give you a quick perspective of how much this world and this country specifically used and loved cocaine, it was used for toothaches in children. A pinch of cocaine was in the original recipe for Coca-Cola. Pope Leo XIII reportedly used cocaine, and it was thought it was a really good idea to use cocaine as a cure for hair dandruff. How we got this far in human life, I have no idea. Now, I bring this up because newspaper tycoon William Randolph Hearst reported that in Chicago, Annie had been arrested for stealing a man's pants and sold them to get cocaine. This, of course, was huge news, and other newspapers started printing stories as well. However, this was completely untrue. Annie never stole pants, and she never used drugs. Plus, Annie and Frank were living in New Jersey and was nowhere near Chicago. And it was later found out that the woman that did commit the crime was a burlesque performer named Maud Fontanella, who, when she was arrested, told the cops that her name was Annie Oakley, which was her stage name. Annie was understandably in freaking rage by this because these reports were ruining her perfect reputation, and she filed libel lawsuits against the 55 newspapers that reported this. The newspaper's defense was that they had used William's article as the only source for their articles, which is not okay. When this was found out, almost all the newspapers redacted their stories and published apologies to Annie. William, however, did not redact his story or apologize. Instead, this jerk hired an investigator to go to Drake County, Ohio, because he wanted to get as much smearing gossip about Annie's past to prove that she did have a bad reputation in order to avoid court judgments equaling to $20,000 or $714,000 in today's money. That guy sucks. Over the next 6 years, she won 54 out of the 55 lawsuits. However, her judgments outweighed the legal costs. But she won. I know for a fact that this didn't ruin her reputation because I had never heard of this part of her story. After all of this, she wanted to do a comeback tour. She continued to perform with other Wild West shows, and Annie kept on setting trap shooting records. Buffalo Bill did try his absolute best to lure Annie back to his show, but she refused. However, they did remain good friends, and when Bill died in 1917 in Denver, Colorado, she wrote an amazing eulogy for him. In 1913, the couple moved to Cambridge, Maryland, where they had built a adorable brick bungalow home. The roof is more flat so that Annie could get on it and shoot game off the Choptank River. I love this woman. This house is known as the Annie Oakley House and is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1996. When World War I broke out, yes, we're still going, Annie wrote the current Secretary of War, Henry L. Stimson, and offered again to raise a regiment of women shooters to fight in the war, saying, quote, "I can guarantee a regiment of women for home protection, every one of whom can and will shoot if necessary," end quote. She also She also offered to teach the male shooters how to accurately shoot. Unfortunately, both offers were rejected. She later reflected, quote, "If I had shot the Kaiser, I might have saved the lives of several millions of soldiers. I didn't know then that he would swing the iron fist and shake the universe. Perhaps it was well for both of us that humans lack foresight." End quote. She basically said, if you would have put me in, coach, we would have won the freaking game right quick. The couple traveled and lived between Pinehurst, North Carolina, and Leesburg, Florida, and continued to set records well into her 60s. She also did a lot of philanthropy for women's rights, supporting young women, and volunteered with the National War Council of the Young Men's Christian Association, the War Camp Community Service, and the Red Cross. The couple adopted a dog who they named Dave, who she trained to smell cash and retrieve them for cash donations for the Red Cross. I swear to you, this is true. The patrons would wrap the cash in handkerchiefs and hide them for Dave to find. This earned him the nickname Dave the Red Cross Dog. I love that so much. In the summer of 1922, when Annie was about 62, she performed at a benefit show in Long Island, and people thought that she was going to make a comeback. And Annie did have plans. She planned to do a comeback and star in a motion picture, but that wouldn't happen. In November of 1922, Annie and Frank were in a bad car accident in Florida, and she fractured her ankle and hip. Her recovery had forced her to wear a steel brace on her right leg, and after a year of recovery, she set more records in 1924, but she never fully recovered. Over the next 4 years, her health continued to decline. In 1926, she was diagnosed with a blood disorder. By 1925, Annie's health was bad and she was very frail. Because of her health, the couple moved to her hometown of Greenville, Ohio, to be closer to Annie's family. They attended local shooting matches, and Annie began to write down her memories, which were published in newspapers all over the country. Phoebe Ann Annie Oakley Mosey Butler died on November 3rd, 1926, of pernicious anemia in Greenville, Ohio, at the age of 66. Pernicious anemia is a rare autoimmune disorder that halts the body from absorbing vitamin B12, which you need to produce red cells. It is said that Frank was so devastated by Annie's death that he just stopped eating, and 18 days later, Frank E. Butler died on November 21st, 1926. They were married for 50 years and they had no children. Annie was cremated and Frank was buried. It is speculated that Annie's ashes were placed in a trophy of hers and placed with Frank's body in his coffin before he was buried. Regardless, they are both buried together at Brock Cemetery near Greenville. Her legacy, I mean, come on. Annie Oakley is a worldwide superstar to this day, and her name is one of the names you think of when you think of the Wild West. She championed women to learn how to use guns to protect themselves, advocated for women to be in war, and was a huge influence on the image of the American cowgirl. Her life, whatever parts of it are true or fictional, only make her life even more insane. Hence why we've been here for 8 hours. Her collection of trophies, medals, and firearms are on permanent exhibits at the Garst Museum and, of course, the National Annie Oakley Center in Greenville, Ohio. She's been inducted in the National Women's Hall of Fame, Ohio Women's Hall of Fame, Jersey Hall of Fame, and the National Cowgirl Museum and Hall of Fame. She's had all the movies and TV shows made about her, and many characters have been inspired by her. She's depicted in musicals, books, was portrayed in season 2, episode 3 of RuPaul's Drag Race All-Stars. She's been in songs, poems, comics. It is even thought, and I totally believe this, that the cowgirl Jessie in Toy Story was inspired by Annie and Calamity Jane, which I am totally doing a video about her. I just have to recover a little bit more. Annie may not have been born or ever lived in America's West, but she is America's West. She was a cowgirl, rode horses, and could shoot the pants off any man. Calling her a Western legend doesn't hit the bullseye, but she was so much more than a performer in a Western-themed show. She was a female legend. She reportedly said, quote, "Aim for the high mark and you will hit it. No, not the first time, not the second time, and maybe not the third, but keep on aiming and keep on shooting, for only practice will make you perfect. Finally, you'll hit the bullseye of success." There you go, ladies and gentlemen, oldies and newbies. The story of Annie Oakley. Again, I knew of her, but always doing the research of somebody that you know, it's always fun to find out things. Who knew that her reputation was almost tarnished because of a stage name of a chick that sold pants for cocaine? Dang. Oh man, yeah, I loved learning that. I loved doing a story about her. If you learned something new, and I really hope you did, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And while you're down there, please leave a friendly comment. Have I mentioned anything that you didn't know about Annie Oakley? I found a few things I didn't know about Annie Oakley. I will be back with another video. Last week or this week, that American Hispanic Heritage Month, I believe that's how it's called, starts. And so I have a couple of awesome Hispanic women coming in. It's gonna be fun. But until then, don't be well behaved. You just might make herstory. See you next time, guys. Thank you for your patience.